This chilling painting was cursed for eternity. There are some things that we shouldn't ever see, no matter how curious we might be. For example, there are some places we should never go, and some things we should never do. And what about some things we should never see? It's not only horrific creatures and demons that can terrify us, but sometimes it's the simple things that freak us out. But today, we are going to look at the strangest things from normal life that were cursed for eternity. So let's start with the first thing that you probably wouldn't want to see. The man in the painting just blinked. Have you ever walked into a room and seen something that froze you in your tracks? It doesn't have to be a demon or a haunting figure, just something that you didn't expect to see. This person experienced exactly this kind of fear when they went to visit their friend's house. They entered the living room and saw something that changed their entire outlook on the day. They were visiting their friend who had recently moved into a new home. And after seeing the painting, they will likely never go back again. But why? What could it be about this painting that caused someone to have such a visceral reaction to it? Well, the answer is quite simple. All it took was a blink. Yes, that's right. A painting in their friend's home made them feel like they were being watched, hunted, or possibly even stalked. How could this be? Let's take a closer look at the painting. At first glance, it looks like a beautiful landscape. There's a lake and mountains and plenty of trees. In the center of the picture, though, there's also a man in a boat rowing away from the viewer. He's sitting down and leaning backward, looking as if he's relaxing and enjoying the beauty of the day. He appears to be rowing his boat away from a small island, which adds an element of adventure and intrigue to the piece. With all of these elements combined, it's an almost idyllic scene. However, this is where things get freaky. The man in the painting blinked. Yes, that's right. The man in the painting just blinked. He seemed to turn his head slightly toward the viewer, looked directly at them, then turned back and continued rowing his boat. To the terrified viewer, it must have felt as if the man was trying to hide something, or maybe he was aware of something that he did and want to share. Either way, the blink itself gave the impression that the man was reaching out and touching the viewer's soul. No one knows exactly why this happened, but according to the original owner of the painting, it hadn't done this before. She bought the painting at an antique store without any real backstory or origin. She assumed that it was just an old painting of a man in a boat. Then one day when she was having friends over, they pointed out that the man in the painting seemed to be blinking at her. At first, she thought that it was a joke. But then she noticed that the eyes themselves did seem to be moving. When she called the antique store to tell them about the situation, they told her that the painting was very old and that it was possible that the varnish had worn off the canvas, causing the pigments underneath to bleed through and appear as movement. While this may sound reasonable, it still doesn't explain why the painting started doing this after hanging in her house for so long. Perhaps the painting was cursed by the artist or the subject in the painting, and now it has come alive to stare at its viewers. The curse of the crying woman. The next item is definitely one that you don't want to come across. As this woman in the portrait is said to be one of the most haunted objects in the world, whoever sees her is said to be doomed. You might think that the reason for this curse comes from the subject's sad eyes. After all, who would want to be reminded of a crying woman whenever they pass by her portrait? But that's not the case here. This woman doesn't cry tears of sadness, but instead cries tears of blood. Now that's definitely something that would stick in the minds of those who see it. But there's more to the story than meets the eye. Before we dive into the story, we have to take a moment to appreciate the painting itself. It was painted by Joseph Huygens and is titled The Weeping Woman. Even though the artist is relatively unknown, the painting has become one of the most famous works of art in history. This is largely due to the subject herself. We don't know much about her. The artist did say that he based the subject off of a Spanish woman that he met while traveling abroad. However, that's about all we know. The rest of the story has been lost to time. Since the painting became popular, however, many people have speculated on the identity of the woman and the meaning behind the piece. Some say that the woman in the painting isn't human at all, but rather a demon or some other evil entity. This theory is supported by the fact that the painting seems to be cursed. Anyone who looks upon the painting for too long is said to be driven mad by the woman's blood-filled eyes. And if they take the painting home with them, they will be cursed forever. If you think that sounds like an urban legend, then prepare to be shocked. It's all true. There are records of the painting driving multiple owners insane and causing them to do terrible things before eventually dying horrible deaths. One of the most well-documented cases occurred in the early 20th century. A wealthy collector purchased the painting for his private museum. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But then, strange things began to occur. Objects started moving on their own, doors slammed shut, and shadows seemed to move around the halls. Eventually, the curator himself became ill and began seeing visions of the woman in the painting. He tried to fight against it, but soon found himself unable to resist her power. He removed the painting from his collection and threw it into a nearby river, but it was never recovered. Years later, the painting resurfaced when a group of fishermen pulled it from the riverbed. It was covered in barnacles and grime, but the image of the woman was still visible. The fishermen took the painting to an antique store where it remains to this day. Anyone who tries to buy it will find that it disappears when they turn their backs. And anyone who looks into the woman's eyes is said to be cursed for eternity. The man who came back. Sometimes the things that scare us the most aren't ghosts or demons, but rather something else entirely. You might not believe this next story, but it's 100% true. You might think that once you die, you stay dead. But this person proves that this isn't always the case. These hikers were simply walking along the Appalachian Trail when they came across a cave. They decided to explore the cave, but quickly realized that they weren't alone. Inside, they found a skeleton wearing clothes. They also found a journal that described the terrifying tale of how this man died. He had been exploring the same cave when he became stuck. He used his journal to describe how he slowly lost his mind and how he began to hear voices. He wrote about how he prayed for God to take him, but instead heard laughter echoing throughout the cave. He described how he began to eat his own flesh, because he thought that it would allow him to live on. Then suddenly his journal entries stopped. The last entry was dated 1884, meaning that this man had been stuck in the cave for nearly 150 years. That's when the hikers found him. His name was Andrew Jackson. He had gotten stuck in the cave and died of starvation, but somehow he managed to come back to life. He regained consciousness only to realize that he was trapped inside a cave and that he had no way out. He managed to crawl out and make his way to a nearby road where he flagged down a passing car. He explained what had happened to him and asked to be taken to a hospital. At first everyone thought that he was crazy. Surely someone who had been dead for 150 years couldn't just come back to life, right? But that's exactly what happened. Doctors examined him and found that he was completely healthy, had no broken bones, and his vital organs were all in working order. As far as they could tell, he had simply woken up from a long nap. But how could this be? Was he really dead in the first place? Or was there something more sinister at play? Sadly, we may never know the truth. What we do know is that Andrew lived the rest of his life normally. He held jobs, got married, and lived until he was 90 years old. Thanks for watching. Do you believe that the things in these paintings are cursed, or are they just tricks of the light? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.